So, welcome to this fourth lecture on stochastic and neural models for speech recognition. I'm in this lecture. I'm just going to go through whatever was discussed in the last class in 10 to 15 minutes, and then I'll continue with this lecture. So, last class we discussed briefly on expectation maximization algorithm. So, the need for EM algorithm is we have seen in lecture 2 that some functions are a bit difficult to differentiate. It has log inside a summation. So, those functions can't be differentiated and solved using ML estimation technique. So, that is why we go for expectation maximization algorithm, where you have a model and it generates the hidden variable and it turn generates the data vector. Okay. So, this is called as latent variable model or hidden variable model and so on. So, this is what is being used to calculate the parameters of the Gaussian mixture model. Okay. And we have seen something called a skew function that instead of directly optimizing the log likelihood function, if we maximize this Q function, it is indirectly related. Okay. So, that we have seen, and we have seen something on Jensen's inequality just to prove that okay, the likelihood the increase in Q function's value is will in turn increase in likelihood function. So, this Jensen's inequality helps in understanding that, and that's what I told, how optimizing the Q function indirectly optimizes the likelihood. And we have seen some graphical illustration of the CM algorithm where we see how we approximate the likelihood function using some convex function, and then that convex function is nothing but Q function, and we iterate it over some 30-40 times and do this estimation procedure. And we have stopped at E step for Gaussian mixture model, and I told I will continue with the next class, that is today. So, we will see. Okay. So, the task is to find the parameters of the GMM model which are okay. So, the EM procedure is nothing but okay. So, you have two steps, one is E step and the other is M step. So, in E step what you do is you calculate something, the density function of this hidden variable using data and whatever the parameters that you have assumed. You have to assume some initial parameters, and from the data and the assumed parameters you calculate the density function of this hidden variable, that is P of z given x theta k. Okay. Then in the M step, using the hidden variable density function and the data, you calculate the parameters. So, this procedure has to be repeated again and again, and that will refine the parameters theta. Okay. And we have seen that so the logarithm of joint density of the data is nothing but the likelihood, and I told you before that whatever the hidden variables that you have and whatever the random variables that you have for the experiment, if we can get the joint density of all the random variables, then that will completely characterize the entire model or the entire experiment. Okay. So, that is why first if we calculate P of x and z given theta, then it is then from there we can proceed further. Okay. So, and but what we actually want is to maximize this log likelihood function. So, we have to relate these two. So, that can be done using Bayes rule. So, I take logarithm of that, move terms around. So, you will get this term. And as I told you earlier, we have to assume some parameter theta, assume some values for the parameter theta. So, that let us call it as theta k, okay, for the first step. Then what we do is we calculate the density function P of z given x theta k, that is the density of the hidden variable with the data given and whatever the assumed parameter that we have. So this is very important. And then what we do is we take expectation of whatever the joint density that we calculated with respect to this density function. Okay. So this is what we calculate. Then what we do is, why is this actually required? Okay, because as I told you, the likelihood function is convex. That is the log of p of x. That is convex. Sorry, non-convex. So it can't be differentiated. So what we do is, if we do something like this, then the convex portion and the non-convex portion gets nicely separated. And we have some, and the ultimate goal is to find the optimal parameter theta. So this will give rise to one function, and this gives rise to one function, and both has to be, we have to choose some parameter theta in such a way that the likelihood increases. So what we should do is, we should ensure that both of these things increases simultaneously. And we have seen that in non-convex, whatever the theta you choose, that maximizes this function. I mean, you will find the increase in this function. So there is no need for that. Okay, we don't get any information for that. Okay, so we deal only with the convex function. Okay, the convex portion of this function, that is called as q, or elbow function, lower bound function. Okay, so if we take this one, then we can choose the theta in such a way that it increases the likelihood. Okay, so we'll see how it happens. Okay, okay, so these are the things. Okay, so the first term will give rise to q function, and this one will give rise to h function. That is this one. Okay, then this is how we choose. We have to choose some parameter theta star such a way that the likelihood at that point, that is this term, will be more than whatever the present likelihood that we have. Okay, and some derivation we have seen where we have seen whatever the theta star which we choose will always get this term greater than or equal to 0. So that is, there is no point in dealing with this function anymore. Then we go to the first function, that is q theta star theta k. What is this? Okay, now we go to the first function, first term, where we see that if we choose theta star in such a way that it maximizes q of theta theta k, then it is it will give rise to increased likelihood value. Okay, from the current point theta k. Okay, so this is what is a complete graphical illustration. Even if you don't understand whatever I have told again, you can watch the entire lecture of the last class. But if you can understand this graph, then it will be sufficient. See, this is the actual likelihood function. And in the east of what we do, and we have to choose an initial parameter theta k. Okay, so that is chosen. And the next step is to take this expectation and get the q function, the convex portion of that one. That is nothing but this one. So this is nothing but the function approximated at the theta k, and lower bounded by upper bounded by this logarithm, sorry, log likelihood function. Okay, so and what you do is, in the next step is to maximize this function. Okay, maximize this function. So the maximum is somewhere here. So that will be the optimal parameter for that step. Then what we do, we assume this as theta k and approximate the function again, the likelihood function again, and we get something like this. And this is nothing but the likelihood function. The likelihood function and the q function will have same value because it is approximated at this theta k. And this function has to be optimized. The maxima is somewhere here. That will be theta star. And this procedure has to be repeated again and again. So now at theta k again. So now it goes somewhere to the maxima. And oftentimes, if it's not initialized properly, it will get stuck in a poor maxima. Okay, so there are some techniques like annealing, and random initialization, repeated random initialization, and then model averaging. So some kind of techniques are there, so you can use those techniques to get to a better maxima. Okay, so and the stopping criteria, when do we stop? Okay, you can go on forever, because you can always increase the likelihood function, the joint the log likelihood value at every step. But the thing is, at some point it increases very slowly. So you can choose, you can either choose some fixed number of steps, 30, 40, 50 or something, or if your objective function increase is not that good, okay, 10 power minus 16 or 10 power minus 17, something like that, then you can stop. Okay, yes, I can't increase it further, it's waste to compute again. So you can stop at that point. Okay, so, and as I told you, okay, we have to calculate this density function, but what is the form of this density function? Is it normal or multinomial or binomial, or so we don't know. It actually, we can choose the form of this density function based on the problem that we have in hand. The problems which we'll be dealing in this course are HMM and GMM. So in that case, it is multinomial density function. If it is factor analysis and so on, this is a normal density function with mean xk or axk and so on. A lot of things are there. So based on the problem, we have to choose the form of this density function. So we have seen that this is the GMM's density function, okay, with m mixtures, where omega m is the weight and mu m is mu m and sigma m are the means and covariance of each of the mixtures. Okay, and we have seen as I told you, okay, so in GMM, this random variable z, this hidden random variable z, is a multinomially distributed random variable, where it is a one hot vector. By that I mean, for each data point you have this z. Okay. So if it is x1, you have z1, and if it is x2, you have z2, and so on. Okay. So this z1 is a vector which is m length, where m is a number of mixtures, capital M, and each entry can either be 1 or 0. Okay, and if you sum the entries of this vector, you should get 1, which means either one of the element only should be 1 and the rest have to be 0. So by assuming z to have this multinomial form, what we expect is this z should somehow capture from which mixture this vector is coming from. If it is 1 here, then it is likely to come from x1. If it is 0, 1, 0, 0 here, then it is likely to come from mixture 2 and so on. So that is what we explicitly wanted the model to model z in such a way. So thus we can write the and in the first lecture, as when we are dealing with map, I think second lecture, I have given some example of multinomial random variable, where if you have, for example, we have n such data vectors, so you have n such random variables. So for one of the random variable, it is the density is nothing but whatever the value you have, what is the probability of that vector taking this value as 1, power whether it is actually 1 or 0 or not. So that's what this means. So if P of Zi is equal to m, then you will have only alpha m term here, because the rest of the Zi's will be 0, and only for that corresponding mixture to which it belongs, you will have that particular term alpha. If it belongs to second mixture, it will be alpha 2. If it belongs to third, it will be alpha 3, and so on. So that's how that is how we define Z in this way. Okay. Similarly, P of x given Z is nothing but whatever the normal density function that you have. For this, you can intuitively view it as I know from which mixture the vector came from. What is the probability of the vector x coming from that mixture? That is nothing but your n. I know if it is some jth mixture, then it is x mu j sigma j. If it is kth mixture, then it is sigma k mu k and so on. And how do we decide, okay, for whatever the mixture value? So that is nothing but you just take power of this one over this binary random variable. So you will get only that term. Okay, so that is so. So just to verify whether whatever the p of x given z and p of z which we have taken is correct or not, we'll just calculate p of x, whether it actually corresponds to the GMM mixture model that we intend to model. Sorry, it should be omega m. So I have modified in the slides, but this is old slide, so that's why. Okay. So to just verify, we'll calculate the GMM density function using whatever the joint density function by marginalizing the hidden random variable. So this can be written using Bayes rule as this. Then if we sum over z, then out of all the z's that xi can take, for example, zi has to be summed over all these possible combinations. Okay. 1 0 0 1 0 0 0 0 1 0 0 and so on up to. So these are all the possible combinations of z, and you have to sum over all these possible combinations. And p of z from the previous slide, okay, we can get it. And p of x given z can be, that is nothing but whatever we have here. And these two things, we can club them together and take the z power m as a common power. And what happens is, when we sum over all these terms, you know that in each sum, for each, if zi takes this value, then what you actually get is alpha m power maybe I'll just write, instead of mu1 sigma 1, I'll write the subscript as n1 itself, just as a shorthand notation, and power 1 plus whatever alpha 2 n2 power 0, alpha 3 n3 power 0, and so on. So you have only one term if you sum for the first z, and for the next z you will get only alpha 2 n2, and for this one alpha 3 n3, and for this alpha m n. So that is why you just instead of the subscript being zi, you have simple m, where you got it right. Okay, so that is so. So now this is what was your assumed density function. So whatever we have chosen, the p of z and p of x given z are proper. Okay. So now coming back to the procedure, so we have we need to construct the Q function. The Q function can be constructed by taking the joint likelihood of the hidden variable and the observed variable, and take expectation of that one with respect to this density function p of z given x theta k. Okay. So this is what we get. Okay. So it's some simple operation where all the products within the log can be converted to sum of logs, and whatever it's in the power will come here, and so on. So this function is actually easy to differentiate, because you don't have any sum inside a log. Okay. So and this z is a binary random variable, so it will take either value 1 or 0. So whatever the 0 term will get will be 0, so anyhow it can be neglected. So whatever it's 1, that's a simple term. Whatever you have, only that comes into picture. So we'll see in this class how do we maximize this function. So is it not going? Yeah, I'm using this one.
You are projecting in Google, no?
Yeah, but the screen is not changing at all.
Just see what is it is projecting right now. Yeah, you have to remove this.
How do we
Can
end?
simply
Okay, fine. So in this class, we'll complete the maximization procedure, and we'll see to compute certain parameters of GMM. Okay, we'll do straightforward derivation, differentiation, and for mean and covariance, it's a bit tricky. Amit knows very well. Okay, so we'll see. We have to work on calculus on matrices, or for example, see, you have a function and you can differentiate it with respect to a variable. This is a simple scalar function, and if you have a function, you have vector. This is vector calculus, and if you have a function and you have to differentiate it with respect to a matrix, then we'll do some techniques. Okay, we'll see how to differentiate a scalar, like a determinant of this a matrix with respect to its the matrix itself. So this will be a matrix. Okay. So here we'll differentiate with respect to some y transpose. Okay, maybe a y given dou y something. Okay, so this we'll see all these things. Okay, how do we do that? Okay, and I'll explain something on k-means and how k-means and GMM are a bit related, and what differences and what commonalities they have. And we'll see both GMM and k-means code. We'll go through the code of k-means and GMM. It's running, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'll show some graphical illustration of how the mean vector moves for GMM case and k-means case. Okay. There is only one. That's all. From okay. Continue. I'll not be using board much. Okay. So the thing is, okay. So we'll see EM for GMM. Okay. We have the task is to find the parameters omega m, mu m, sigma m, and we have assumed some density function for z and p of x given z, and we computed the q function, which looks like this. And before, this is what we saw in the last slide of the last lecture. And before we differentiate this and set it to 0, we'll simplify it further by taking the expectation inside and see how it simplifies. Okay. So when the expectation is a linear operator, so we can take it out inside. And in the first term, ZAM log omega m, the log omega m doesn't have any z term, so it can be taken out, and the expectation is applied only on the z. So expectation of this z im with respect to some density function over z is nothing but 1 into probability of the z taking value 1 plus 0 into probability of z taking value 0. So that's all. So as this is 0, it gets vanished, and 1 we can remove it, and that is what you get here. P of ZIM equal to 1. So we'll in a shorthand notation we'll write it as gamma im. So gamma im is nothing but the posterior density function. Posterior density function for in this problem means what is the probability that the data vector I comes from mixture M. Okay, so this is that posterior density function, and when you sum this over M, it equals to 1. Okay, because it can this vector can either be from one of the mixtures, right? So so it can take it can come from this mixture with some probability, it can come from this mixture with some probability, and so on up to mth mixture. So if you sum all these things, you should actually get 1. So that is what posterior density actually means. Okay, so we define it as gamma im. Mth Gaussian of the mixture. Sorry. Okay, so now the Q function now simplifies to this term, and similarly, okay, even here, even in the next term, you have only ZIM. So whatever the log normal density of mth Gaussian, it doesn't have any Z term. So the same trick applies here, and you get only gamma im. Okay. Now the thing is, we have to differentiate this function with respect to whatever the parameters you have, omega m, mu m, and sigma m. You have to differentiate with respect to these parameters and set it to 0. But the thing is, we can't directly differentiate it because it is bounded by some constraint such that all the mixture weights should sum to 1. So this is a constraint optimization problem. So you have to construct the Lagrangian such that, okay, this is the objective function plus the Lagrangian multiplier into the constraint which you have. Okay, and now you can differentiate this one. As this is an equality constraint, the Lagrangian multiplier, you don't have to worry about the sign of the Lagrangian multiplier. It can be positive or negative. Okay, so so now taking derivative with respect to omega m dash, because there is already an m in the inner summation, so I just used m dash just to avoid confusion. Okay, so what we can do is, only this term doesn't have any omega m, this has and this has, so we can remove this one. Okay, so and even here what happens is, this is a sum of all the omega m's. Okay, so omega 1, omega 2 plus omega 3 plus omega up to omega m. So only one of the term will be equal to 1. So that is why if you differentiate this with respect to omega m, you will get only the lambda. And here, out of all the summations, only the m dash summation will have will be something, and the rest will be 0. Okay, so that something is nothing but the derivative of this log omega m. So the derivative of log omega m is 1 by omega m. So that is why when we take this inside, this summation over n gets consumed, and you get only the m dash's value. Okay, m dash's term. Okay, so and you can rearrange the terms and find the value of lambda. Just you can use the constraint that we had. Okay, so there is no direct way to solve for lambda. So what we do is, you sum this term with respect to m over the index m, and what you get is, this is a posterior density function. Okay, so you can interchange this I and m dash such a way that, because this is a bounded sum, so you can interchange. Okay, so as gamma m is a posterior density function, when it's summed over m, you will get 1. So this summation, when it sums, it will be 1, and it is summed I times, so it will be n. Okay, so that's how you get lambda is equal to minus n. Okay, now substituting this value of lambda in the above equation, that is this equation, that is this equation, we get omega n as the average of whatever the posteriors that we have. Okay, so I'll give you some intuitive explanation of why omega m is like this. Okay, see, you have a sample x1, okay, and this posteriors are nothing but what is the probability that this vector comes from mixture 1, okay, what is the probability that this vector comes from mixture 2, and so on, okay, and x2, this is gamma I1, 1, rest 2, everything, okay, and so on. What is the probability that this x2 comes from the first mixture? What is the probability that x2 comes from the second mixture, and so on? Okay, you have for all such data points. Now, if I ask you, what is the probability that any vector x can come from the first mixture? Which is nothing but you just have to take sum of this one, and similarly sum of this one will tell you what is the probability that any vector can come from the mixture, the Gaussian 2, any mixture coming from Gaussian 3, 4, 5, and so on up to Gaussian m. Okay, but that is not a density function. Okay, you have to normalize it. By that I mean you just have to divide by n. Okay, so if you do that, then it is normalized.
Telling it accumulative probability, something like that, because one vector is having gamma 1, another vector is having gamma 2.
Yes.
So the probability
Gamma 1 means what? The first example. Gamma 1 is the first example, and this, whatever the entries in that column will tell you what is the probability that that example came from that mixture.
Then what is this row-wise summation?
Row-wise summation is nothing but your, what is the probability that any vector coming from the first mixture, first component. Okay. What is the probability that any mixture coming from the second component, and so on. Yes, you.
What is the difference between mixture and Gaussian 1, mixture 1?
Oh, I interchange both the terms, but it is actually component 1. Mixture will contain 3-4 Gaussians. In that, the huh?
Mixture 1 is what?
Mixture 1 in the sense, see, how many mixtures are there in this? I can tell 3 are there. But we don't number these mixtures explicitly. Okay, it is there in the back end, that's all. We don't know what this corresponds to the first. Gamma 1 is the first sample which you have. What is the probability that it is coming from this mixture, and this mixture, stacked in a column? That is gamma 1. You are summing up this entire thing.
This summation may increase, maybe greater than 1 also.
Yes, obviously. This will be greater than 1. So you have to normalize it, right? So that's why. And you can do this in a formal way like this, or you can intuitively get to know about this. Okay, so this is the easiest part in the entire M step. Now we have to solve for a little more difficult one, that is mean. So we have the same Q function. We have to take derivative with respect to this mu m dash, and in this case, this one doesn't depend upon mu m, and this one doesn't have any mu n term. So only this middle term has. So we have to maximize this function. Okay. So okay, just for to remind you, okay, again I have just written that Nm is shorthand notation for the first component, second component, and so on. So mth component Gaussians density. Okay. So we just substitute that here. Okay, that is this function you have to substitute here. Okay, so that's what I did, and whatever the log we had and whatever the constants which were there, so this one doesn't get involved in any optimization procedure, and this 2 also will not get involved. So when we take logarithm, you remove all the unwanted constants and unwanted scales that you have, and somehow we'll get something like this. Okay. So now we have to take this derivative inside. Okay. So this derivative is with respect to mu m. So you can take this, you can take the m outside. Okay, this. So what we have here is we have sum over I, sum over m, gamma im, xi minus mu transpose sigma m inverse xi minus mu 1. Okay. So now what you have to do is you can take this when you take derivative with respect to the mth term, okay, and there is a sum over m, okay. So only one of this out of all the terms in this sum, only one of the term will have this mu m dash term. So that's why we can write it as xi minus mu m dash, okay, transpose sigma m inverse and whatever xi minus mu m dash, okay. So this is what you have, and this one doesn't have any mu m dash term, so you can take this one outside, okay, outside this derivative, okay. And whatever you have here, this depends upon mu m. You can also tell that the sigma m doesn't contain any mu m, so you can also take this outside. No, it can't be, because it is these are vectors, okay. So this is some a product of the vector with respect to a matrix, and then again you multiply with some vector. So it can't. Which one? This entire thing is a scalar, but this is a matrix, right? So you can't take this out directly, okay. So what you should do some tricks and tweaks, okay. So I'll explain the trick, okay. Anyhow, I'll explain the trick here. So this is a lecture scribe which I have created for this lecture, okay. So shared in this OneDrive link. So the thing is, you can see from this function that there is a vector xi minus mu m dash transpose some matrix into some vector, okay. So we take derivative with respect to some vector, okay, which is present in this. You can do change of variable and assume that y is equal to xi minus mu m, and take derivative with respect to y, and then you can simplify this thing, okay. So somehow even if we simplify, okay, we have to find this term dou y of y transpose ay. So how do we do that? That is done like this. So y transpose ay is nothing but you can write it as sum over I, sum over j, aij, yi, yj, okay. So if you have any questions in these form of notations, you can ask me, okay. So even you can try this yourself, okay. You can just see for a small matrix whether it applies or not. Now this, when we take a partial derivative with respect to y, that will become a vector, okay. Okay. So this is nothing but a vector, okay. So the vector's elements are nothing but, you take this function, whatever the function y transpose ay, take partial derivative with respect to each of the variables. and stack them together in a column. So that is nothing but your whatever the final answer you want. Okay. So you need to compute n such element, where n is the number of the dimension of y. Okay. So now let's compute one of the term. Let's say kth term. So the kth term, you take derivative of this function with respect to the yk. Okay. So this function taken derivative with respect to yk. So this you can what you can do is this as this dou y by dou yk is a linear operator, you can shift it inside this first summation, okay, and you will get something like this. Okay. Now this is a partial derivative of two terms. Let's call this as u term and this as v term. So using product rule, dou of uv is equal to u dou u plus v okay, so u dv plus v du. Okay, so that form. Okay, so this is nothing but du and v plus u dv. Okay, now let's look at the second term first. Okay, so we can see that this term will be equal to 1 only if j is equal to k equal to I. Okay, else it will not be, it will be 0. Okay, any questions? Okay, so out of all the terms, only one of the term will come, and that is for that particular k. So that is why out of all the sums of all the sum over j, you take only the kth term. Maybe I will explain it on board. First, let's take only this term. Okay, so here what you do is you are having some summation, and you take derivative with respect to only yk. Okay, so you will have a1 ai1 y1 plus ai2 y2 plus something, and somewhere here you will have aik yk plus up to a I n y m. Okay, so when you take derivative with respect to yk, only this term depends upon yk, so the rest of the things will be 0 0 0 0 and so on. So when you take derivative with respect to yk, what you will get? You will get only aik. So whatever you have here will be nothing but aik. Okay, and this yi will come into picture, summed over I. So that's what the first term corresponds to. Okay, we have it here. Okay, now let's look at this second term. Okay, the second term here is j. No, there is a an outer summation as well. Okay, so I j aij yj, this multiplied by dou yk of yj. Okay, let's consider this as a constant because this doesn't have any I. Okay, so let's call this as some alpha. Okay, so this is nothing but sum over alpha dou y by dou yk of yj. Okay, now this is summed over I, so which means what? You have alpha dou by, sorry?
Aij is
Which A, J?
So you can take it as alpha I.
Sorry. Okay. So alpha 1 into dou by dou 1 of y1. Why? Sorry? Which denominator? Sorry. Okay. Yeah. And so on, and somewhere here you will have alpha k dou y by dou yk into yk plus something. And in this case, everything will be 0 except for this term, and that is alpha k. Okay. So that's why you have, so you will have one of the terms. So this I, there is no summation over I, because there is only one term here, and that is nothing but your alpha k. So what is that alpha k? Alpha k is, you substitute I for alpha, I for k here. That is nothing but summation over j a k j y j. So that's all. This will be nothing but your second term. That's what we have here. So what is this? This is, one is nothing but the row of this. What is this one? Row, right? That is column. Kth column multiplied with a vector y, and this term is nothing but kth row multiplied by vector y. So that is the answer for the kth element of the vector, the final vector which we want. And for first element, it is nothing but first row multiplied by y plus first column multiplied by y. For second entry, it is second row multiplied by y plus second column multiplied by y, and so on. So you fill up the final answer with all these things, and finally you get nothing but A transpose y plus A y. Okay. Just in element form I have written here, and here I have written it in a vector form. Okay, that's all. That's the difference. Okay, you can see that this is y with respect to y, which means with respect to each entries of y. Okay. So here from this thing itself, you can tell that if A is some symmetric matrix, then whatever the thing you got is whatever the thing which we wanted to compute is 2ay. You can even substitute the property of symmetric matrix here. Okay, A transpose is equal to A, so ay plus ay, so which is nothing but 2ay. So this is one corollary. Okay. So finally, what does it take from this proposition? Dou y transpose ay by dou y is nothing but A transpose y plus ay. Okay. So that is the final take. And that is what we wanted. Okay, we have some vector transpose multiplied with some matrix multiplied with the same vector, and we have to differentiate with respect to that vector. Okay. Now if you do that, which is nothing but, and you know that sigma m, so this is nothing but A in this case is sigma m inverse, sigma m dash inverse. So this is a symmetric positive definite matrix and so on. So you can substitute the corollary of the proposition which you have seen, which is 2ay in this equation, and we get something like this. Where is it? So we get something like this. Okay, 2 sigma m inverse into xi minus mu I m. So just substituting this term here instead of this partial derivative, we'll get whatever the posteriors that we have into whatever the derivative which we have taken here, 2ay, which is 2 sigma m inverse xi minus mu I. Now we can rearrange the terms and find out the expression for the mean vector, which is nothing but the posterior, the vectors, the sum of the vector weighed by the posteriors. Okay, so that is what the estimated mean is. So to give an intuition what this mean vector is, see, you again, okay, consider this x1, x2, these samples what we have, and you have the posteriors gamma 1, gamma 2, and so on up to gamma n. Okay. Now this will tell you the probability that this vector coming from the first component, second component, third component, and so on up to mth component. Okay. And similarly, second vector coming from first, second, third, and so on up to mth component, and similarly so. Now what we are interested is, we have to find the mean of the first component. Okay. So which means you have to find the mu1, the first component's mean. Okay. So what you should do, you take the first component posteriors. Okay. And what you do, if everything is 1 and the rest are all 0, then it is nothing but whatever the samples you have, you just average it, and that is what the mean you get. Okay. If it is not, then what you should do, you should weigh the sample accordingly. Okay. So this is the probability that this might have come from the first component. So whatever the probability we have here, okay, weigh it. Okay. And this is the probability that this vector might have come from the first component. So whatever the value here, substitute, and so on you do. Okay. Now this can blow up. Okay, if you have 10,000, 1 lakh vector and so on, this will blow up, and even this is not a proper estimate also, because it's not scaled properly. It's not weighed according to a density function. It is just some number. Okay, so we have to weigh it accordingly. So that weight is nothing but whatever the values you have here, is just sum. Okay. So now it becomes a proper mean estimate, and similarly you have to calculate for the second component. So this one with respect to multiplied with the first vector, and this value multiplied with second vector, and so on, and scale it accordingly. Yes. Which summation? Summation over what? Summation over I. Okay. Summation over I. I is over 1 to n, capital N. N is the number of samples that we have. No. You should not consider I as row or J as column and all this thing. With respect to what you are summing? You are summing across all the data samples. Okay. Because what is gamma? Gamma IM. I is the index that points to the data sample, and M is the index that points to the mixture. Okay. So when you sum over I, you sum across all the data samples. So you sum across all the data samples. If you sum over this, you sum across one data sample over all the mixtures. Okay. So it's like that. You should not assume that always, okay, I always refers to, because we are okay with for I, then for J, and so on. Okay, but if I can always interchange it, right? So this is how the mean vectors are estimated. So any questions? Okay. Now we'll go to covariance matrix estimation. This procedure is a bit involved, so I'll try to go a bit slow. So again, okay, we have the likelihood function, the Q function with the constraint, the Lagrangian of the Q function with the appropriate constraint, and we have to take derivative of this function with respect to your covariance matrix. See, we can take derivative with respect to sigma m itself, but the thing is, when you take derivative with respect to sigma m, things will get a bit complicated. Okay, so that's why if you take with respect to sigma m inverse, then things will go a bit nicely. But it's up to you. Okay, if you want to, it's your choice. Okay, so now we can, as this is a linear operator, we can take it inside. So this is summed over m. So when you take only one of the term will contain m dash. So this vanishes and get absorbed to whatever the m dash that we have. Oh, okay. Maybe first let's remove some of the terms where which doesn't have any dependency on sigma m. So this doesn't have any dependency and this doesn't have any dependency. So both are removed and only this term has. So that's why we keep it here, and we just expand this term. So that is something like this. Okay. Now, when you take derivative with respect to this sigma m inverse, then you will get something like this. Okay. So first, before going to the derivation, again, okay, you can assume the x1 and whatever the posteriors you have, and x2 whatever the posteriors you have, and this is a covariance matrix. Okay. So how do you calculate covariance matrix? Normally it is summed over x minus whatever the mean you have, x minus whatever the mean you have, take transpose of it and scale it. Okay, so this is what your actual estimate of covariance will be, but this is a weighted estimate. GMM does soft weighing. Okay, so it means this is the probability that it can come from the first mixture. So first mixture's covariance is nothing but whatever the ith vectors corresponding to the first mixture's posterior, and you do the same computation, and you have to scale this one. Okay, so you have to sum over 1, and similarly for 2 you just have to sum over gamma i2 here, gamma i2, and so on. Okay, so this is how you can intuitively think of this as a weighted covariance estimation. Okay, so you don't choose all the samples equally, you choose each of the sample according to this weight given by the weight is given by the posterior, the gammas. Okay, so now we'll go back to the derivation of this one. Before going to the exact derivation, I'll go through some of the theorems involved. Okay, that if we go through, then this entire estimation procedure will be a bit easier. So here let's first look at the likelihood function. So this is the likelihood function. This is the objective function, and we have to take derivative with respect to whatever the matrix that we have. Here all the terms depend upon the sigma m. So one contains log of sigma m inverse, and the other contains a vector multiplied by the matrix and then some vector. So how do we do such kind of derivatives? Okay, so that is why we'll first look at these propositions. Okay, so in whatever the first term that we had, so we take the determinant of this matrix and take logarithm of that, and we take partial derivative with respect to each of the elements of A. So this entire thing will be like a big matrix. Okay. So this is the partial derivative of log mod A with respect to A11, with respect to A21, and so on. This is with respect to A12 and so on of this function log of mod A. Okay. Now by a simple chain rule, okay, we can write logarithm of something is nothing but 1 by that whatever the quantity, and we take partial derivative of this with respect to dA. Okay. So now we are okay with this. Okay. This is a simple scalar quantity. Okay, you can get, but this involves again partial derivative. Now we have to compute this one. So how do we do that? So again, okay, this is a matrix again. So we have to take derivative with respect to each of the entries. And what is this determinant of A? A is a matrix, okay, a big matrix, where you take one of the row, okay, and multiply it with its cofactor, okay, that is A11 into A11. A11 is some shorthand notation. You know about the cofactor, right? So you remove the ith row and jth row and whatever the matrix you have, you take appropriate sign of that one. If it's an odd entry, it will be alternating plus and minus. Okay, so this is what A1 is, the cofactor, and whatever this value you have, A21 into its cofactor, A21, and so on up to AN1 into AN1. Okay. Now we have to take partial derivative of this entire thing with respect to Aij. Okay. So this is a linear operator, so you can move this inside the sum. Okay. So dou by dou Aij of A11, A11, and so on. Okay. Let's assume two cases. I'll tell you why these two cases are required. Okay. Let's assume if I and j are equal. Okay. So which means when you calculate the determinant, only one of the diagonal term will come into picture. Okay. So dou I j of whatever the mod A is nothing but whatever dou I. Maybe you can even take I equal to 1 just for simplicity, and dou A11 into A11. Okay, this is what I want. So apply chain rule. Okay, UV U dV plus V du. Okay. So this term is nothing but 1. Okay. So the second term will be nothing but A11. That's all. Okay. Now what about this term? A11 into partial derivative of capital A11 with respect to small a11. So will this term contain any A11? It will be 0, right? So you have A11. So the partial derivative of the determinant of A with respect to any of the diagonal elements will be nothing but its cofactor. Okay, that's all. What if it's not the case? Then in the cofactor term you will have that term, okay, and how many such terms will be there? You will have only one such term, okay. We will see. Maybe I can be taken as 1 and j can be taken as 2, okay. Well, just for an example, okay. Dou a12 with respect to the determinant, which is nothing but dou a12 into a11 a11 plus dou a12 into a21 a21 and so on, okay. Now the thing is, you will have one of the term here. See, you can take determinant. Maybe what I'll do. So this will be a bit easier for this explanation. So the rest of the entries are all 0, okay, except for this term, okay. So what this term will is again, okay, a product of two functions. So apply chain rule where dou a21 into a21 this is what it is, okay. Anyhow, this can be taken out. This is 8 1. What about this one? It's a bit difficult, right? I'll tell you a simple way to solve this thing. Even before taking product rule, okay. So you take these two functions as a single entity, and then see what this function is. You see, A is a symmetric matrix, okay. So A21 is equal to A12, you know that, right? So this term will have an A12 term, which is nothing but A21, okay, because it's a symmetric matrix, into some A31 plus its cofactor also. So it's a completely recursive formula, okay. Now imagine this function as x into x into y plus z or something, in a simple way, okay, and take partial derivative with respect to x. What you will get? So this is nothing but, you can apply chain rule here, x into y plus z into 1 plus x into y plus z something, which is nothing but 2x into y plus z. So what will you have here? Whatever the recursive form you have here. And what is this one? This is nothing but cofactor of this entry, okay. Any questions? And this is for, that's why I have told before itself. Okay. That's why I have written here in the corollary that if A is unstructured, by that I mean there is no dependency between any of the entries of the matrix elements, then the result is trivial. That is nothing but A inverse. If not, okay, so it is nothing but for diagonal elements it is Aij, that is a cofactor of that element. If it is off diagonal, then it is twice the cofactor. Okay. So how do you write this in a matrix form? I have expressed it in a element wise form. This whatever the curly braces have. So in off diagonal element, I have 2 times the cofactor matrix. Let's call CA as the cofactor matrix. Okay, so which is nothing but CA plus CA. This is 2CA for all the elements. But in the diagonal elements, I don't have one of the cofactor elements. So which means you just have to subtract this by diagonal of cofactor matrix. I got it right? So which is nothing but if you have a matrix like 1, 1, 1, 1 and so on, and 2, 2, 2, 2 everywhere else, this is nothing but 1 plus 1, maybe this is a shorthand notation for all the things, okay, minus diagonal of 1. You can express this in this way, right? So this 1 matrix is nothing but every element of this is 1. Let's assume. Okay. So I have written the same thing. Okay. So if the off diagonal elements of are twice occurring, I mean, if it's having twice some value, and if the diagonal elements are just some value, then it can be expressed as sum of 3 matrices, where you sum the matrix, whatever the matrix twice, and you subtract the diagonal elements of that matrix from the sum matrix. It's very simple. Okay. So this is what the final expression is. Okay. For the derivative of the determinant with respect to the matrix. Now we'll try to simplify it further. We know that the cofactor matrix is nothing but A transpose. So you, in your childhood, you might have seen A transpose is nothing but adjoint of A. Adjoint of A is nothing but the cofactor matrix. And you take transpose of the cofactor matrix and determinant of A. So now you take things the other side, and you know that this is a symmetric matrix. So CA transpose will be equal to CA, or A inverse transpose is equal to A inverse. Know that. Using that property, we can just derive this. Okay. But we are not interested in this. We are interested in the derivative of log of mod of A with respect to the matrix. So we just substitute this one in equation 1, where we have, so this is what we were originally interested in, and we found out that this is nothing but okay, and now we got this. That is nothing but 2A inverse minus diagonal of A inverse into determinant of A. So there is a determinant in the denominator and 1 in the numerator. So both the things get cancelled, and finally you get 2A inverse minus diagonal of A inverse. Okay. So as you asked for unstructured matrix, the result is trivial in that case. So this I don't know how you find this derivation. It might be easy or difficult. Okay, but there is one more difficult way to prove that, where you take not the partial derivative, you take the differentiation of this matrix and express that differentiation with respect to the partial derivatives. using something called as some S matrix will be involved, J matrix will be involved. Then using that you find some relation and then express that differentiation with respect to some derivative. So it's a bit difficult to understand. So I hope you understand this way of proving things. Okay. So that's all we have. So in the final, so ultimately what we are interested in is solving this. So one of the terms we got some idea. Okay. Then what about the other term where you have a vector, some vector, and you have the matrix, and you have some vector, and you have to take partial derivative with respect to this one. So if we know how to solve this, then that's all. Then whatever the propositions and theorems that we have seen earlier, now we can apply it in this formula and get a simple derivation. Okay. So we'll see that now. Okay. Sorry, this is transpose, right? Okay. So what is this quantity? This is a vector transpose column vector. This is a row vector multiplied by a matrix and a column vector. So this will give you a single value, right? So it's a scalar. So even if you add trace of this, it doesn't make any difference. Okay. And you know the property of trace, right? So you have A, B, C. Let's assume all these things are compatible. Okay, and we do multiplication. So you can do a rotation in this order. Okay. So these are some useful properties that you should, and even once more, and so on. Okay, whatever the number of matrices you have. So this is some property that you should remember. So apply this property here. So this is nothing but Y transpose. Okay, dou Y. Oh, okay. Maybe M dash. So how do we solve this? We know that this is a matrix, right? So this is a symmetric matrix, and we know that covariance matrix is a symmetric matrix. So the inverse is also a symmetric matrix. So in our case, we need to find, will treat this as a vector B and this as a vector A. Okay, and both A and B are symmetric. Okay. Now how trace of AB is defined? It is nothing but sum over I, sum over J, AI, okay. This is nothing but whatever the elements you have, A11, A12 and so on, A21, AN1 and so on, and whatever the B11, B12, B21, B22, so on. Okay. So this is nothing but A11 into B11 plus A12 into B21 and so on. So that constitutes the inner summation. Okay. And you are not interested in finding all the elements of this product matrix. You are interested only in the diagonals. So after this you can skip and go to the second row is the second column. Okay. That is nothing but the second entry of this sum. Okay. So this is how you should interpret it. Else, okay, if you have studied the Celano course, these kind of things will often come. Okay, so you can interpret it easily. Okay. So where were we? So this is the final expression, and we need to take derivative of this with respect to the matrix A, and this is an entire matrix. So let's find for one of the element A K L. I chose this thing because I don't want to confuse you with, because here already ij were, and also let me take some other two indices. Even in this case, okay, as A is symmetric matrix, okay, we will deal in two separate cases where K and L are equal, and in the other case where they are not equal. So if K and L are equal, okay, then this is a sum, okay, double sum over ij, and it's a linear operator, so you can take it inside. So when will this term be 0 and when will it not be 0? Only when I is equal to k, only at that time this term will not be equal to 0. For the other cases it will be 0. Okay. So only when I is equal to k, which means wherever you can remove the sum, and wherever you find I, you put k. Anyway, we have already done this differentiation, but still let me put it. Okay. And out of all the j's, when will this be? Only when maybe only when j is equal to L will have something. Sorry. Okay. No. So we'll have, and we are taking partial derivative with respect to dou KL. So this is nothing but the variable, and this whatever the constant we are getting, we are multiplying. So when we take partial derivative with respect to this, we'll get LK. Okay. LK or KL? Should be LK, right? Yeah. Okay, anyhow, I'll correct it in the scribe. Okay, it should be LK. Okay. And if K is not equal to L, again, we can use a similar argument which we had for the previous proposition. In this case, you will have two terms, BKL plus BLK. Okay. So now combining these two things we have, for the off diagonal element we'll have BKL plus BLK, for the diagonal elements we'll have BKL. Okay. So this is nothing but B transpose. Okay. So you have a matrix, and again, anyway, even if it is BKL or BLK, this is a symmetric matrix, right? So in this case it doesn't make any problem. Okay. So like the previous thing, okay, you sum the two matrix and take and subtract the diagonal elements of that matrix from the sum. Okay. And this is what the final derivative is. And if these are unstructured matrix, then it's simply it's B. Okay. So now we got to know how to take derivative of trace of a product of two matrices. Okay. That is nothing but 2B minus diagonal of B. Okay. Because B is equal to B transpose. So now let's finally go to the derivation of the covariance matrix. Okay. So we had the Q function, and it's and from there we had a constraint, and we constructed the Lagrangian, and from there we neglected all the terms which had which doesn't have sigma m inverse, and we keep only those terms which has sigma m inverse, and now we spread this partial derivative inside the sum, and as it is as the second summation is over m, and the index is m dash, only one of the term in the sum will contain m dash, so keep only that term. And similarly for the second term also we do the same thing. Here, as I told you, take the trace property and shift the entries accordingly, such that you have this kind of structure. Okay. Now you take the sum inside this partial derivative inside the sum again. Okay, this sum over m gets only one of the term in the sum will be non-zero, so keep only that term, and this is finally equal to 0. Okay, so this is what we got. Okay, now what you can do is you can take you can split this and move whatever the diagonal term to one side and whatever the main matrix term to the other side. Okay, if you do that, then any of the multiplier is the same. Okay, so you can take these two sums and put them together. Okay. So which means you have gamma I m dash, and here whatever the sigma m you have, and whatever the xi minus mu transpose, take it together, that is this term, and whatever the diagonal of sigma m and diagonal of x minus mu transpose, take it together, you will have something like this. Okay. Now if you see that this matrix and this matrix are exactly the same, these two matrices. Okay, which means what? You have a sum, within the sum you have the posteriors, okay, weighing this matrix. What is that matrix? 2 sigma m right, minus x minus mu transpose. Okay, so this is the matrix you have, minus diagonal of the same matrix. So what does this mean? You have a matrix, you double it in the sense, double each of the elements of the matrix, and you take only the diagonal element. Okay, and when you weigh it with some non-positive quantity. Okay, so because these posteriors are non-positive, these are probabilities. Okay, and these are non-positive, and when you do that you get 0, which means what? The matrix itself should be 0, right? Okay, which means whatever the m dash should be equal to 0, and its diagonal is also 0. Okay, the diagonal of this, so whatever the things you have, just repeat it here, its diagonal is also 0. Now if you substitute this in this equation, you will not get any useful information. Okay, just if you want, you can substitute this sigma m for all I, if it is equal to 0, then you have 0 here and you have 0 here, and some over weighted sum of zeros over this posterior density is equal to 0. There is no useful information. Okay, maybe we'll substitute only this. Okay, so if you substitute this, this term vanishes, and you will have only this term. Okay. This 2 we can remove, that's not useful. So what we do is we take this sum, we spread the sum within the terms, minus this is one term, xi minus mu m, xi minus mu m transpose equal to 0. So just take this to the right, we'll have something like this, and this is not dependent upon any, this is not indexed over I, right? So you can take this outside. Whatever the right hand term here, okay. And sigma m is finally, this is a scalar quantity, so you can just simply divide it. Oh, sorry. When you split the sum, you have to take the gamma also inside. Right? Okay, I forgot it. Okay, x minus mu transpose divided by. Okay, so this is the final derivation of the covariance matrix of m dash component, okay, which is nothing but weighted sum of the covariance of each of the samples that you have, okay, weighted over the posterior density function, okay, gamma. So this completes the maximization step of GMM. So this may look difficult, but this is all. This is the maximum difficulty that this course gets. That's all, not more than this. If you know this, then you can solve any procedure for any of the models. Okay, any of the latent models. Okay, so anyway, these course, whatever the scribes that I have, that these are shared in the OneDrive. So I have sent you the link already. So I'll put all the videos, the PPTs, the scribe notes, the codes, everything will be there in that link. So once we had estimated the parameters theta, that is your all the mixture weights and your means and your covariance matrices. Okay. So what do we do? This EM, this is a one step. We did one step of expectation, we computed the posteriors, and we did one step of maximization and computed these parameters. Then assuming this as a current parameter, you compute the Q function again, okay, and then from there you get the posteriors, okay, and from there you have to get the new parameters, and from there you get the Q function, and from there you get the posteriors, and this has to be repeated again and again, okay, and stop at some 40 iterations or something. So that's all. This is the end of EM, and I'll talk little bit about K-means algorithm and what commonalities and what differences that this has with GMM. Okay, so because in one iteration you can't jump to a good optimal point, because it's a highly non-convex function. I'll show some demo at the end of this thing. Okay. So here the K-means clustering, the problem is defined like this. You are given some data samples, n data samples, some vectors, n vectors, and we need to find the clusters from the data, the inherent clusters of this data. Okay. So the clusters are defined by the cluster centroids. You can also have some cluster covariance and cluster weights. That's why I've put it in some shade. So the main thing is cluster centroids. Okay. So in this procedure, what we do is we initialize the centroids to some random values. Okay. And in the next step we find the closest cluster for each and every point. Okay, for example, this is x1, x2 up to xn what we have. So we have let's say 4 clusters. Okay, we have to assume this k. Okay, some 4 or 5 or something. Okay, let's assume k is 4. So for each data point we find, okay, whether this is close to the first cluster or the first centroid or the second centroid or third or fourth, and we tell, okay, this C1 is equal to 4, which means first vector is close to the fourth centroid, and C2 will tell you x2 is close to which centroid, and so on up to Cn. Okay. And what we do is, in the next step, we find the mean of all the vectors which correspond to cluster 1. Okay. So if it is 1, okay, then pull that. If it is 1, no, it's 4, no, don't take it. Somewhere you will find some vector which is 1. So pull all those vectors together which has 1. Okay. Take mean of that one. Okay. So that is nothing but your first cluster's mean, and similarly do for all the 4 clusters or the remaining 3 clusters. Okay. So now we got earlier this was the mean, so we have to assume some mean which we randomly initialized. Okay, mu1 to mu4. Okay. Now in the next step, okay, after doing this closest cluster estimation, and from there, okay, you estimate the mean of each of the cluster, you found new cluster centroid. Now keeping this as the starting point, you find the closest cluster again for each data point and do this procedure iteratively. Okay. So this will converge to some solution, and mathematically it is explained in this form. Okay. You, for each sample, you have to iterate over these 2 steps. For each sample, get the cluster ID, the closest cluster ID, and for each cluster, compute the mean of the vectors which belong to that cluster. Okay, that's what this I is indicator function. Okay, and here you see that, okay, this is an Euclidean distance. Okay, which is nothing but, you can view this as argmax of the normal distribution with center mu and covariance identity of whatever the vector that you wanted. Okay. So this is very simple thing to prove. Okay. This is a simple maximization because this will have some 1 by root 2 pi power d sigma n inverse something, and this is an identity, so nothing is lost here, and exponential of minus x minus mu, identity again. Okay, x minus mu. So this has to be maximized. Okay, so this is a constant, so this doesn't get involved in this one. Maximizing this is same as maximizing log of this one, so log and exponential gets cancelled, and maximizing this is nothing but minimizing x minus mu transpose x minus mu. Okay, so this is nothing but norm of x minus mu square. So you take square root of this one. So that's what. Oh, maybe square. Okay. So that's how we prove that both are similar. Yes.
Suppose we have clustered the point, then we compute the mean, then again we go and
Yeah, iterate.
so it is possible that mean we are calculating that is not even one point in the cluster, it is some point combination of that. So ultimately at the end of the day, like whatever mean we get, it may not be a data point, but some
Yes, it may not be a data point. Okay, it can be, but it can belong to that cluster. Okay, it is in the vicinity of the data points from which the clusters.
I think most of the cases mean will be like that.
Yes, you can't expect that to in a real line. Okay, and that you can never expect it to be a data point. Okay. Sometimes, okay, they take medoid, something like k medoid is there, right? So they choose the data point itself as a mean, which is closest to that. Metroid is astronomical term. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fine. So this, so what your you're clear, right? So this is this procedure, this k-means procedure is similar to GMM. Okay, but before we see about the similarity, okay, we see what difference it is. Because here there is no covariance matrix and no posteriors are getting involved. Here we are calculating only this C's, which means it either belongs to 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, that's all. Okay, it doesn't tell anything about it belongs to 1 with some probability, it belongs to 2 with some probability, nothing like that. It is a hard decision, but in GMM it's a soft decision. Okay, soft decision imposed by the posteriors, hard decision in k-means imposed by this C values. Okay, and here the distortion measure can be anything. Okay, it can be Euclidean distance, it can be Mahalanobis distance, it can be weighted Euclidean, it can be cluster-wise Mahalanobis distance. This cluster-wise Mahalanobis distance closely relates to GMM, but it's not exactly because of the hard thresholding. Okay, so that is the difference between GMM and k-means. One does hard thresholding, the other does soft thresholding. Okay, so oh, that's all. So we'll see quickly within 5-10 minutes the MATLAB implementation of GMM and k-means. Yes.
So does k-means assume that the underlying distribution is Gaussian?
Is normal. Yes, it is normal.
But in this procedure, it is nowhere.
See, it is visible. See, it is see whatever I did here. This assumes that the data points are normally distributed with mean mu and covariance is identity. Okay, that's what I told about this Euclidean these distances. If you use the distortion matrix as Euclidean distance, then the entire your covariance matrix is identity. Okay, if it is weighted Euclidean distance, then your covariance matrix is diagonal. Okay, if it is Mahalanobis distance, it is every clusters are having the same covariance, same spread. If it is cluster-wise Mahalanobis distance, then it comes closely to GMM, right?
That means before doing k-means clustering itself, we are assuming data is coming from.
From yes, that depends upon what distortion function you use.
But all involved that Gaussian mixture model, GMM assumption, right? All of them.
No. Not all. Only cluster-wise Mahalanobis distance is close to GMM. The rest of the things, this one assumes no GMM. It assumes that the cluster itself is a single Gaussian with identity variance, covariance. Okay, we'll quickly go through the code. First, let's see the k-means, how k-means performs. Okay, so meanwhile we will go through the code. So what I did was, I have generated some 4 clusters. The first cluster with mean 2, 2, the second cluster with -2, +2, -2, -2 and +2, -2. So it's a 2-dimensional vector, and this is how the scatter plot of the data looks like. So as you can see, there are 4 clusters. Okay, this has mean 2, -2, this has 2, 2, 2, -2 and -2, -2. Okay, and we have to do k-means clustering on this. Okay, so so here I am just plotting the data, the scatter plot once, and this is the main procedure. This is some simple initialization. Okay, so I am initializing the things, the initial mean randomly, and for each iteration I am doing this. I am finding the closest centroid here. Okay, in this for loop, which is I am going through each of the data point, and I am calculating the distance of each of the data point with respect to the cluster, the first cluster mean, the second cluster mean, the third cluster mean and fourth cluster mean, and I am taking minimum of that, and whichever the cluster ID which is minimum to that data point, I am taking that one. Okay, I'm saving that value. Okay, and using that, I'm grouping them together and calculating the mean. That's what I'm doing here. Okay, and I'm assigning the freshly computed mean to whatever the values you have. That is just repeating again and again. Okay, so I'm doing this for I don't know how many iterations, 15 iterations, and I'm plotting the scatter plot and the mean, how it goes every 3 iterations. Okay, so this is how it looks. So this is the initial plot. In the first after third iteration it becomes something like this. Then in the fourth iteration it moves here. In fifth iteration it moves here. Sixth, somehow it got converged in some 12th or 13th iteration itself. So this is how k-means performs, and this is how GMM performs. The same way I am generating the clusters and I am plotting the data, and I am initializing the weights, the mean. Here there are 3 parameters, unlike k-means which had only 1. Here we have 3: weights, means and covariance, and for each iteration I am getting the posteriors first. There we have to get the closest cluster ID. Here we have to get the posteriors. Here you don't need the Q function as such, because from the Q function we get only the posteriors, and only that is used for for estimating the parameters. So it's okay to get only the posteriors. I mean, posteriors are just sufficient. So once the posteriors are the gammas are calculated, then you compute the weights, which is nothing but the average, and you compute the means, which is nothing but weighted average of all the samples, with weights being the posteriors, and here the covariance matrix, which is nothing but weighted average of outer products of every vector, where the weights being the posteriors. And once done, you update the values and do this procedure again. And I am plotting every 6 iteration. What is the how it is advancing? Let's see. This will take more time, okay, because this will involve things like calculating the density function, that whatever the 1 by root 2 pi power d exponential of that, how many times it calculates for lot of times. Intentionally I have not vectorized this one, okay, because let it be easy to understand. So if you want, you can keep this as a starting point and vectorize this one. That's why I have written lot of lines here instead of using a for loop. So just for you to understand. Okay. I think we can go for lunch and come back. Yeah, it's done. Okay. So anyway, in this case, earlier the means were like this. Now it is spreading, and so on. And at the end, it didn't even converge. Okay. So this is one special case. Okay. See, even at this point, the likelihood actually increases. But if you see, each of the clusters are having identity as, actually the clusters are having identity as a covariance matrix. But if you see this cluster, it assumes that this is a cluster, sorry, this is a cluster, and this is another cluster, and this is another cluster, and this is another cluster. Okay. It somehow hit the wrong spot. Okay, sorry? Because see, for us, for our eyes, okay, this one looks these 4 looks like cluster, okay. But for the yes, I have put the colors. So it calculates everything on its own. So in that case, it calculates. We wanted it to be a plus, okay, but it calculated x. Okay. even that is also a valid cluster, right? But we'll anyhow, not always that happens. Okay, we'll try it again. Initialization was uniform weights and some random mean and some positive definite covariance. No, even after this, it's okay. Wait, let me run again. Because in the morning when I was running, it was proper, but I don't know why. Wait, I'll try it once more. Okay, we'll try this once. If it is not coming properly, then we'll separate the clusters such that it is actually clusters with shifting the mean. So, yeah, yeah. Mm. Ah, bingo. So we got it now. So this is a scatter plot, and this is after 6 iterations. Then this is after 12 iterations, 18, and so on. Somehow it is getting converged. So after 30, so there is no need, because we during the estimation we use only the posteriors, and posteriors are obtained from the Q function. So there is, so even if you wanted to get Q function, how will you store it in MATLAB? That's a function, right? So you can store only value. Yes, actually to tell, okay, why the posteriors are like that, why posteriors are computed in this way, you have to formally derive it through Q function. Okay, so you can take this code and modify it such that you can show the PDF of each of the clusters in a 2D, in a 3D space, and do some modification in this code. And because I don't have good artistic skills, okay, so you can label some of the things, put legend and all other things, and make this code look beautiful. Okay, so someone can and after you modify, you just tell it to me, so I'll verify it once and upload the final code. Okay, so that's it. Today's rather long class. Okay. Okay, so in the next class we'll see. I have not decided what I'll take next class, but mostly HMM or map estimation of Gaussian and Gaussian mixture model. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, I hope everything was clear. Thank you.